Welcome to a brand new deep dive series.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be a good one.
We're going deep into the world of psychedelics.
Yeah, a fascinating world for sure. Lots to uncover.
And it can be kind of complicated sometimes, right? So we're doing something a little different with this series.
Yeah, we're taking what we call a spiral learning approach.
I like that. So start with the basics.
Right, lay the foundation.
And then we kind of revisit those ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Each time we come back, we add another layer of complexity.
Like we're building up to something.
Yeah, it's like a detective novel,
Oh, I like that.
piecing together clues.
To get the full picture.
Exactly. And today's clue, you could say, is receptor pharmacology.
So we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
We are. This is how psychedelics actually work in the brain.
Right, the nuts and bolts.
The mechanisms, yeah. So we're not talking about, like, mystical forces here.
No magic wands.
No magic wands.
Yeah.
We're talking about actual science. We're talking about how these molecules interact with specific receptors in the brain.
Okay, so it's like a lock and key kind of situation.
How are you saying?
Each psychedelic molecule is a key.
Yeah, and it fits into a specific lock, which is the receptor.
Okay, and these receptors, they're not just floating around randomly, are they?
No, they're part of these intricate networks.
Pathways.
Yeah, pathways, like communication highways in the brain.
And we're focusing on three main pathways, right?
That's right. Serotonergic, dopaminergic, and glutamatergic.
Okay, so crash course time. What are those?
All right, think of the brain as this, like, massive network of roads.
Okay, I'm visualizing.
Each of these pathways is like a major highway
Okay.
with specific types of traffic flowing through. So the serotonergic pathway, that's all about serotonin.
And serotonin, that's the one related to mood, right?
Yeah, mood, sleep, even appetite, lots of things.
So if psychedelics mess with that pathway, that's how they change how we feel and how we see the world.
Precisely. Now, the dopaminergic pathway, that's all about dopamine.
Dopamine, that's the pleasure and reward chemical, right?
Yeah, think of it as the brain's reward system. Motivation, pleasure, movement, all that good stuff.
Okay, and what about the glutamatergic pathway?
That one's the information superhighway.
The big one.
Yeah, this is for learning, memory, sensory processing, how we make sense of the world around us.
So psychedelics can potentially affect all of this. I mean, mood, motivation, senses, even how we think and learn.
Yeah, they can. And here's the really interesting part. Different psychedelics. They interact with these pathways in different ways.
Makes sense. Right. Like LSD is different from, say, ayahuasca.
Exactly. So by understanding these interactions, we can understand not just, what it feels like to take a psychedelic.
Right. Not just the trip itself.
Right, but also, what are the potential therapeutic applications? What are the risks? Even the ethical considerations.
Wow. Okay. So receptor pharmacology, this is like the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. For everything we're going to be talking about in this series.
It's the key.
It is.
Okay, so let's zoom in a bit. Let's start with the serotonergic pathway. Why is that so important when it comes to psychedelics?
Well, you see, most classic psychedelics, things like LSD and psilocybin, they mainly work on this pathway.
Okay, so this is where the action is.
It is. And they specifically target a subtype of serotonin receptor called the 5-HT2A receptor.
5-HT2A. That's a mouthful. So that's like the main stage where the psychedelic show happens.
You could say that. When psychedelics bind to that receptor, it's like turning up the volume on certain brain signals and dampening others.
Okay, interesting. So it's not just about turning everything up.
No, it's more nuanced than that. It's about changing the balance.
And that leads to?
All sorts of things. The changes in consciousness, perceptions, emotions, all the stuff we associate with the psychedelic experience.
So these tiny little molecules can really shake things up.
They can. And even though they target the same receptor, different psychedelics can still interact with the serotonergic pathway in slightly different ways.
Oh, interesting. So even within that one pathway, there's a lot of variation.
There is. Take MDMA, for example.
Ecstasy.
Yeah, it's also known as ecstasy. Now, MDMA does act on 5-HT2A receptors.
Okay, so it's on the same stage.
It is, but its main effect is actually on serotonin transporters.
Serotonin transporters, what are those?
Well, if the 5-HT2A receptor is the stage, The transporter is like the stage manager.
I like that.
It controls the flow of serotonin.
Makes sense.
And MDMA, it makes that stage manager work overtime. So you get this surge of serotonin in the brain.
And that's what causes the euphoria and the feelings of connection that people talk about.
What's the current thinking? Yes.
Wow, so it's not just about which receptor binds to, it's also about how it affects the whole system.
Exactly. It's about understanding the nuances of each pathway and each psychedelic.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. But, why is all this so important? I mean, why should we care about these pathways and receptors?
Well, for a few reasons. First, it helps us understand, the nuts and bolts of the psychedelic experience.
Right, not just the subjective, oh, wow, everything's melting kind of thing.
Exactly. It's about the why and the how. Second, this knowledge is key for exploring therapeutic potential.
So how we can use these substances to actually help people.
That's right. For example, if we know that psilocybin increases serotonin activity in certain brain regions, well, maybe that can help with depression.
Because depression is often linked to low serotonin.
Right. And third, this knowledge helps us understand the risks, too.
Right, because anything that messes with the brain can have downsides.
Exactly. If we know how they interact with serotonin receptors, we can better understand, the potential for anxiety, paranoia, even lasting perceptual changes.
Okay, so knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
We need to understand this stuff to use it responsibly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about serotonin, but what about dopamine? What role does that play in the psychedelic experience?
So most classic psychedelics, they mainly target serotonin, right? But some, like LSD, they also have some affinity for dopamine receptors.
Okay, so dopamine is kind of a supporting actor in this whole psychedelic play.
Yeah, you could say that. And that interaction with dopamine might be part of why LSD can feel stimulating, why it can cause euphoria.
Makes sense. And dopamine's also linked to addiction, right?
Uh-huh.
Does that play a role in how psychedelics might be used to treat addiction?
That's a complex question and a hot area of research, but some scientists believe that psychedelics could help reset the reward pathways in the brain.
Interesting. So it's not just about suppressing cravings. It's about changing how the brain responds to rewards in the first place.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, so lots to explore there. But let's move on to the last pathway, glutamatergic. You said it's like the brain's information superhighway. How do psychedelics fit into that?
Well, the glutamatergic pathway, it's all about glutamate. That's the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter.
Excitatory, what does that even mean?
It means glutamate makes neurons more likely to fire, to send a signal.
Okay, so it's like the spark plug of the brain.
Exactly. Keeps things running. And it's involved in basically every cognitive function you can think of. Learning, memory, attention, senses.
Wow, so glutamate's kind of a big deal. But do psychedelics directly bind to glutamate receptors?
Not really, no. Not the classic ones anyway. But they can influence the glutamatergic system indirectly.
Through the other pathways.
Exactly, like a domino effect. Some research suggests that psychedelics can actually increase glutamate release in certain areas, like the prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex, that's the part involved in planning, decision-making, right?
Yes, and self-awareness, too.
So psychedelics can turn up the volume on glutamate signaling, even without directly binding to the receptors.
That's the idea. And that might be why they can boost creativity, make people think more flexibly, and change how they perceive the world.
Okay, it's all coming together. So we've got the serotonergic system, that's like the conductor of the psychedelic orchestra, right? Shaping the whole experience. And then the glutamatergic system, that's like the string section, adding all these layers of complexity.
That's a brilliant analogy.
And then somewhere in there, you've got dopamine, maybe on percussion, influencing motivation and reward.
I love it. It really is like an orchestra with all these different players interacting to create the symphony of the psychedelic experience.
Incredible, right?
Yeah.
But we have to be real here. Psychedelics, they're not a magic bullet. There are risks.
Of course.
Yeah.
And understanding this pharmacology, it's crucial for understanding those risks, too.
Right, because knowledge is power. We need to know how these things work if we want to use them safely.
Absolutely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. I think we've given our listeners a great starting point for understanding the science of psychedelics.
We have. We've laid the groundwork with receptor pharmacology.
And we've just touched on some of the really exciting areas we're going to explore in this series.
It's going to be an incredible journey.
So listeners, what are your initial thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, what are you thinking? Are you starting to see how understanding the science can help us make sense of these powerful experiences?
And as you mull that over, here's a thought-provoking question for you. if different psychedelics work on these pathways in unique ways.
Could personalized psychedelic therapy be the future of mental health care?
That's a fascinating question, and one we'll definitely be exploring in future episodes.
So make sure you subscribe to the channel and join us for the next deep dive into the world of
It's
psychedelics.
going to be mind-blowing.
It really is. I mean, personalized psychedelic therapy, that's a powerful idea. And it all comes back to what we were talking about, the receptor pharmacology.
Yeah, it's like we're figuring out the exact keys to unlock healing in each person's brain.
That's it. And not just healing, but like well-being, growth. Imagine a future where mental health treatment isn't one size fits all.
So like a tailored suit
Yeah.
made just for you.
Exactly. We could tailor treatments to a person's brain chemistry, their specific challenges.
That sounds almost futuristic, like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It might seem that way, but we're already laying the groundwork. Scientists are mapping all these interactions between psychedelics and receptors.
It's like we're creating this massive database.
Yeah. And we have these amazing tools now to look at individual brains, see how they work.
So are you saying that someday we could create like a psychedelic cocktail?
I think it's possible. We could have a combination of substances perfectly calibrated to address a person's needs, like, say, someone is struggling with depression, right? Maybe they get psilocybin to help break out of negative thought patterns, combined with MDMA to help them process emotions, connect with their therapist.
That's wild. But I mean, wouldn't that be incredibly complex to develop?
Oh, absolutely. It would require huge advances in genetics, brain imaging, all sorts of things. But with good research, ethical guidelines.
Yeah, we have to be careful.
Of course. But the potential is there to revolutionize how we approach mental health.
It's exciting to think about. But, psychedelics aren't just potential medicines. They also have this whole history of spiritual use.
Right? Absolutely. For centuries, indigenous cultures have used them in rituals, ceremonies.
It's like they've had this intuitive understanding of how these substances can affect consciousness.
Yeah, they've known this for a long time. Ayahuasca in the Amazon, psilocybin mushrooms in Mexico, peyotes in Native American traditions.
Wow. So many different cultures using these substances for spiritual purposes. It's like a global phenomenon.
It is. And there's this deep respect for the power of these substances, something we sometimes lose sight of in modern discussions,
Yeah, I see that. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, the potential benefits, and forget that these are powerful tools.
Exactly. These cultures, they approach psychedelics with reverence, with care. They understand that they can be used for healing, but can also cause harm.
It's about balance, right?
Yeah. And one thing we can learn from them is the importance of set and setting.
Right, that's something we talked about earlier. Your mindset, the environment.
Exactly. These cultures don't just take these substances casually, they use them in carefully constructed ceremonies.
With experienced guides.
Exactly. They understand that the context matters.
Yeah, it's not just about the chemistry, it's about the whole experience. But, let's be real here. Psychedelics aren't for everyone.
Absolutely not. They can be really challenging for some people, even destabilizing, especially if they have certain mental health conditions.
Makes sense. Like
Yeah.
any powerful tool, you have to use it with caution, respect.
Exactly. And if we're talking about using psychedelics therapeutically, well, that requires careful screening, preparation.
And the guidance of trained professionals.
Absolutely. We can't just hand these substances out like candy.
Well said. And this brings us back to responsible use, ethical considerations. All those important things we'll be exploring in this series.
Right. As psychedelics become more mainstream, we need to make sure they're used ethically, safely.
And honor those traditions, the wisdom of the cultures who have been using them for centuries.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation. We've gone from the tiny details of receptor pharmacology to the big picture of psychedelics and consciousness.
And we talked about these mind-blowing possibilities like personalized psychedelic therapies.
We just scratched the surface.
We have. There's so much more to explore, from the neuroscience to the cultural, spiritual aspects.
And as a reminder to our listeners, we're taking this spiral learning approach, right? We'll keep coming back to these key themes, going deeper each time.
Absolutely. And in our next episode, we're going to dive into the world of psychedelic research.
All the latest findings, the efforts to develop safe and effective therapies.
It's going to be a fascinating journey, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it.
It's going to be mind-expanding. Welcome back to our deep dive into psychedelics. We've been talking about all these fascinating things, receptor pharmacology, those brain pathways.
Yeah, all those little interactions that shape the psychedelic experience. It's like we've peeked behind the curtain of the brain, right?
Exactly. And now we're going to shift gears a bit. We're going to talk about psychedelic research.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time for this field, Like we're on the verge of something big.
I feel it too.
Yeah.
After all those years of psychedelics being pushed aside, it's like science is finally catching up.
It really is. And there are a lot of reasons for this resurgence of interest.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest is the mental health crisis, right? So many people struggling with depression, anxiety, addiction, and traditional treatments, they don't always work.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Hmm.
People looking for new solutions, something different.
Exactly. And there's this growing sense that, maybe pharmaceuticals aren't the only answer.
People are more open to alternative approaches.
They are. And at the same time, as science is advancing, we have these incredible tools now to study the brain, understand how psychedelics work at a molecular level.
Like we can finally explore these substances with the rigor they deserve.
Precisely. And the early findings, they're really promising. Clinical trials are showing that psychedelics can have a real impact on conditions like depression, anxiety, even addiction.
Yeah, I've read some of those studies. They're pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples? What are researchers seeing?
Sure. There was this groundbreaking study on psilocybin in cancer patients. Just one dose, combined with psychotherapy, led to significant reductions in depression and anxiety.
Wow, just one dose. And the effects lasted.
Yeah, for months. And it's not just about end-of-life care either. We're seeing similar results in people with depression and anxiety who don't have life-threatening illnesses.
So it's like a whole new paradigm for mental health care.
Uh-huh.
And what about addiction? I know there's research happening there too.
Oh, yeah, lots of exciting work. One study at Johns Hopkins found that psilocybin-assisted therapy helped people quit smoking, and the success rates were really high.
Wow, that's amazing. But how does that even work? How can a psychedelic help with addiction?
It's complex, but one theory is that psychedelics can disrupt those ingrained patterns of thought and behavior that fuel addiction. It's like they help you break free from those old loops.
So it's not just about willpower. It's about changing your perspective, your relationship with the addiction.
Exactly. And these are just a few examples, There's so much research happening right now on PTSD, OCD, chronic pain, eating disorders. It's a really vibrant field.
It's incredible. Like we're unlocking the secrets of the brain. But I imagine there are still challenges, right?
Oh, of course. One of the biggest is regulatory approval. A lot of these substances are still classified as Schedule I drugs.
Which basically means they're considered dangerous and have no medical value.
Yeah, which makes it really difficult to do research, to get funding. It's this catch-22, We need more research to prove the benefits, but the regulations make it hard to do the research.
Yeah, that's frustrating. So how do we break through this?
Well, things are starting to change, slowly. The FDA has granted breakthrough therapy designation to psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression.
Oh, wow, that's a big deal.
It is. It means the FDA recognizes the potential, and they're going to speed up the approval process. And there are a lot of people working to reschedule some of these substances, make them more accessible for research and therapy.
Yeah, we need to change these outdated laws. They're holding us back.
Exactly. And public education is so important, too. People need to understand the potential benefits of psychedelics. We need to challenge the old stigma.
I agree. We need a more nuanced, evidence-based approach to these substances. But, I mean, even as we celebrate the progress, we have to acknowledge the risks, too, right?
Absolutely. Psychedelics are powerful tools, and they can have downsides. People need to go into this with realistic expectations.
Can you talk a bit more about the risks? What should people be aware of?
Sure. There are some common physical side effects like nausea, changes in heart rate, and psychologically, psychedelics can cause anxiety, paranoia, even temporary psychosis in some people.
So it's not all fun and games.
No, it's not. And even in the best case scenario, with good preparation, a good guide, psychedelic experiences can be really intense. They can bring up old traumas, difficult emotions.
Which is why it's so important to have trained professionals involved.
Exactly. It's not something to be taken lightly. And I think it's important to address this concern that some people have, about psychedelics becoming too mainstream, losing their therapeutic potential.
Yeah, I've heard that worry. Like, if everyone's using them recreationally, will they still be taken seriously as medicine?
Right. We need to be mindful of that, learn from the mistakes of the past. We need to use these substances responsibly, ethically, balance their potential for healing with respect for their power.
It's like finding that sweet spot where we can harness the power of psychedelics without losing sight of the risks.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And education is key. We need to give people accurate information so they can make informed decisions.
Absolutely. We need to foster a culture of respect, understanding around these substances.
I agree. And as we move forward into this new era of psychedelic research, we need to do it with scientific rigor, ethical awareness, and a deep respect for the human mind. It's a powerful combination.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but it's clear that psychedelics are opening up all these new possibilities for understanding consciousness, for healing.
It really is an exciting time to be alive. And listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic, dive into the research, have conversations, stay curious. There's so much to learn.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with this final thought. If psychedelics can dissolve the boundaries of our ego, connect us to something larger than ourselves, what does that mean for our understanding of human nature, of our place in the cosmos?
It's a big question, one that's been pondered for centuries. And maybe, just maybe, with this resurgence of research, we're getting closer to some answers. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.